Hey guys, Dr. J here. What I want to do today is break down how to do a barbell squat properly, especially if you're lifting heavy weights. It's not just about winging it. It's not just about getting the bar on your back and actually just doing the movement, but there are specific cues and specific things that I do in order to brace my body and build up the strength necessary to be able to tolerate that weight without injury. So stay tuned. So a barbell squat is primarily a quad dominant movement. What that means is that the knees actually translate forward directly over the toes. So while you can make it a little bit more hip dominant, at the end of the day, a squat is going to be an exercise that primarily utilizes the muscles around the knee, namely your quads and your hamstrings, followed by some secondary muscles such as your glute max, as well as some of the other muscles that I'm going to tell you about in just a little bit. So to initiate a proper barbell squat, you need to think about firstly, something that's far away, well, not necessarily far away, but I would say something that's indirect from the legs, and that is your lat activation. So your lat is primarily a muscle that brings the elbows closer to the middle of the body. So that means that the elbow contributes to the shoulder. It's basically shoulder adduction. It's bringing it close to the body. So that's why when you do a pull-up, you're bringing the elbows close to your rib cage. And if you do that properly, bring your shoulders away from your ears, you definitely feel that lat activation. But people fail to realize that on a barbell squat, you definitely don't want to let the bar win and have it round your back. You definitely want to stay nice and engaged and keep your back as neutral as possible. So in order to do that, you do need to have proper latissimus dorsi activation, because lats are also a spinal extensor. So if you engage your lats and you actually pull down, that's going to be really critical to having a very stable squat. So let me show you over here. So the mistake that I always see a lot of my clients and a lot of people around me make is that when they set up underneath the bar, what they do is that they're actually just kind of keeping it in this position as if they're just simply racking it onto their shoulders. This is actually not the right thing to do, because if you're just simply carrying the bar on your traps, then you're just kind of balancing it there. You're not actually kind of squishing it down onto your lats and creating that spine extension moment. So if you are somebody that does this here, let me know in the comments, where you're just simply holding the bar on your trap. What you want to think about as you grab it is you want to pull that down. Think about the end of an isometric lat pull down as if you're doing a lat pull down, and you keep the bar kind of close and you do an isometric hold for 5 seconds. That's exactly what you want to do. So instead of racking kind of like your thenar eminence or your palm under the bar, I like to get my fingers over the bar and pull that down nice and hard onto my trap. So when I actually rack the bar like so, I'm actually squeezing it down onto my trap. Okay, so that's one of the common mistakes that I see. And let's go ahead and go through another tip here. So another mistake I often see is people not bracing properly. When the weights are light, or even if you're starting off with body weight, you'll notice that a lot of people follow the same principles, which is when you're going down into a squat, you're inhaling, and then when you burst up, you exhale. And that's oftentimes what I do, is that even certain people, they just hold the breath throughout the movement and they just pass out. But exhale on exertion is still something you want to do. The only difference is when the weights are a lot heavier, you want to make sure that you exhale only at the top. So the analogy I like to use, especially when I try to teach my clients intra-abdominal pressure, I call it the underwater analogy. So when your head is over water, okay, so imagine if your head is over water and you're at the top end of the squat, when you go under the water, what do you have to do? You have to hold your breath. And depending on how long you're underwater, you want to make sure that you're holding your breath longer. So you're going to take a deeper breath out. So this is relative to saying, if you were to hold your breath for 1 minute underwater, you would want to take the biggest gulp of air before you initiate going underwater. This is the same thing goes with a weight that's sufficiently heavy for you. Anything between 85% of your 1 rep max, you want to take a much larger gulp of air and push that air down into your cavity right here. So right below the rib cage, you'll see that some people, when they breathe, they'll do this. They'll do a really hard sternal lift. They'll breathe, and you'll see that I become more barrel chested, but that doesn't make the squat any better. When I'm pushing all the air into my sternum, I'm not stabilizing my center of gravity. My center of gravity for most people is around L5 to S1. That is our center of gravity, which is right around our pelvis. And that's the area that you want to stabilize, especially when you're doing a heavy squat, because that's where a lot of the load bearing is going to be. So instead of breathing in, so that using that underwater analogy, you're still gonna take a large gulp of air relative to the amount of weight that you're doing. You don't wanna gulp that air here, where my chest, you see that sternum lift. You wanna make sure you breathe, and you notice that my rib cage, I wanna imagine my ribs expanding 360 degrees. And then once I trap that air in, I close that air off. You wanna imagine trying to decrease that volume and squeezing that balloon in. So watch, it's like this, okay? Did you see that correctly? So I want you to now push against your rib cage. So that's a smaller abdominal cavity. You're going to breathe in through your mouth and through your nose. You see that expansion? And then you're going to push the air in, keep all the air in as you pressurize that balloon system, okay? So that's the proper breathing pattern. So I'm gonna use a weight that, for me, it's a little bit more of a warm up, just to show you for demonstration purposes. So again, what we talked about is that lat activation, not having your hands here, but having your hands directly over the bar. You're going to lift up, okay? Usually I would be facing the other direction, but I wanna show you this for the pattern, okay? So once I'm in my good squat pattern, pull that bar onto your traps, take that deep breath in, okay, and again, my head is over water. Okay, and that's exactly how you do your barbell squat. So those are two big changes that I want you to make, especially if you're gonna try to lift heavier, and heavier is indicative of obviously more hypertrophic gains for your lower body and greater overall lower extremity strength. But make sure you're doing it properly by engaging your lats in order to get your spine into extension and maintain extension as you have a heavy bar on your back, but also maintain proper intra-abdominal pressure. The last mistake I want to tell you about is improper warm-ups. So I showed you a few things that you can actually do during the squat, but what should you do before you squat? Well, basically, some of the main things you want to think about are hip mobility, specifically hip flexion, as well as internal rotation. You want to think about knee flexion as well, and especially if you have maybe any knee discomfort. Let's say you have patellar tendonitis or quad tendonitis, you may also want to improve knee extension, which is basically that locking out type moment in your knee, and also adequate ankle dorsiflexion. So ankle dorsiflexion is when your knee translates forward over your toes. When you see somebody that either has a tight Achilles cord or even a stiff ankle, you'll notice that when they descend deeper into the squat, their heels lift off. So let's go ahead and go through two of my favorite warm-ups that I think you start utilizing today. So the very first exercise I want to go through is just an ankle dorsiflexion rock exercise using a bench. So you want to have your foot against the bench because it's oftentimes easier to control the amount of leverage going forward. And also the great thing about using a bench is that, let's say if you have any sort of stiffness in your ankles, you're going to notice that as your knee translates forward over your toe, your heel may lift off. But the great thing about this is that you can simply just rock forward, and I can also put my thumb underneath my knee just in case I have any stiffness in my knee. So I'm also mobilizing not just my ankle dorsiflexion, getting that knee over the toe, but I also am improving knee flexion as well. And as I warm up, I may want to scour the ankle. So basically what I'm doing here is as I'm bringing the knee more towards the outside of the pinky toe, followed by going through the third toe and also over the first toe. And basically that's called scouring the ankle joint, where you don't want any stiffness in the entire kind of ankle dorsum right here. And so once you do that, if you wanted to, you can actually go into ankle dorsiflexion, where as I'm doing this, I should have gained a little bit more range of motion. But with using a bench, I can actually provide some overpressure by doing more of an isometric row, pulling my knee down and pulling my chest down into my thigh. That's going to provide a little bit more overpressure, and I can feel a little bit more range of motion that I didn't get just by squeezing and pulling myself down into the bench. So this is going to be the very first warm-up that I often do before I squat. So the very last warm-up I want you to show you is called simply a passive goblet squat. So you can either grab a kettlebell or a dumbbell. So there's nothing more functional for actually warming up a squat than the squat itself. So with lighter weight, I can usually access and gain deeper ranges of motion, and I can play and scour different parts of the extremities that I would need to warm up. So depending on like where your stiffness lies, this is a great movement to do. So once I pick up the kettlebell, the reason why I use weight is because it can pull me further into more flexibility. If I didn't have this kettlebell, or if I didn't put the kettlebell forward, I oftentimes will have to rock forward. You'll notice that my heels kind of lift up. However, when I bring this kettlebell forward in front of me, now you can see my heels are kind of down on the floor. So now I can work on ankle dorsiflexion. I can work further on knee flexion, so I can actually bring my knee forward. Okay, really, you want to get your knee kind of used to that type of load where you're translating that knee anteriorly, especially if you're going to be doing some barbell squats. Another thing that I like to do is I like to push my elbows out and then gain a little bit of groin mobility at the same time. Okay, I can just rock kind of back and forth here. Okay, and depending on how you do it, you can either put this kettlebell down and you can drive that knee down into internal rotation. So what that's doing, and the reason why I want to work on hip internal rotation as well, is because our hip is a ball and socket joint. So when we go deeper into a squat, we're not just going into hip flexion, as you can see when my knee is closer to my chest, that's called hip flexion, but our hip actually has to create room for internal rotation in order to go deeper into that squat. So with limited flexion or internal rotation, oftentimes you'll see people start to like round their pelvis. You might lose that positioning in your pelvis where, you know, when that weight's heavy, that bar can essentially round the rest of your body and then you fail that lift. Okay, so just make sure that in order to improve, even to maintain good spinal extension, you want to have adequate room and adequate mobility in your hip socket, as well as your knees, as well as your dorsiflexion. All right, guys, hopefully that you found that helpful in terms of breaking down the barbell squat, especially some of the 3 common pitfalls that I often see with a lot of my clients. And also, these are common pitfalls that I've learned from over 15 years experience in terms of not bracing properly, not adequately warming up my body, or even not properly engaging my lats in order to maintain proper spinal extension. So if you have any questions or anything, feel free to comment down below. Also, if you did find this helpful, feel free to like and also comment. Let me know what else you want to see on this channel. But also, if you found this interesting, please subscribe. Definitely that helps support the channel. My goal here is to try to get to at least 5,000 subscribers. I think that's a great milestone. So please, please, please go ahead and subscribe and also tell your friends about this. I want to post as much content as possible that will help you to not just get stronger, but also help to improve your mobility, reduce pain, and get you back to the person that you want to be, being the best version of you. So take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.